Imagine a fear, right? A collective fear so strong, so pervasive, it starts to warp how everyone sees reality. Suddenly, ordinary people look suspicious, communities break apart over accusations that just sound impossible. Sounds like a medieval witch hunt, maybe. But this actually gripped America not centuries ago, but in the 80s and 90s. It left behind this terrible trail of ruined lives. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into this phenomenon called the Satanic Panic. Our mission really is to try and understand the social patterns, the cultural currents that allowed this kind of hysteria to just take hold. We want to look at all the factors that fed into this national obsession with, well, completely unfounded fears of satanic ritual abuse. And more importantly, what does this strange, dark chapter tell us about ourselves, about our anxieties, how we collectively make sense of the world?
That's a great way to put it. And the core question, I think, the one we're really wrestling with is, what are those subtle social dynamics, those cultural norms maybe we don't even notice, that make us vulnerable to this kind of mass hysteria? How do claims with zero proof suddenly become accepted facts for so many people?
Yeah, it's a question that feels pretty relevant today, too, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a critical lens for looking at all sorts of modern anxieties and, conspiracy theories that seem to bubble up constantly.
So, to really get it, we have to go back. Picture the early 1980s in America. You've got this noticeable rise in religious fundamentalism happening.
Right.
And at the same time, there's this growing and kind of understandable anxiety about child safety. Child abuse awareness was increasing.
A very potent mix.
Exactly. These two powerful currents sort of collided, creating this charged atmosphere. And the spark that lit the fuse, that was the McMartin Preschool trial out in California. Teachers accused of these just horrific acts of satanic ritual abuse.
And the McMartin case is so key because, as you mentioned, the claims were shocking, but there's a real lack of physical evidence. I mean, basically none.
Right.
And later, some key witnesses even took back their stories. But despite all that, it just exploded onto the national stage. It wasn't just some local story.
No, it became the story.
Precisely. It became this pivotal event that unleashed a flood of similar accusations all across the country. It really shows how a single, unverified incident can ignite a national panic if the underlying social conditions are right.
So McMartin was the spark, but what fanned the flames? How did this local case turn into something everyone was talking about, something people genuinely feared?
Well, you absolutely have to look at the media's role. It
Yeah.
was huge. Think about primetime TV shows like 2020, even Oprah. They weren't just reporting. They were running these really sensationalized segments about satanic cults.
Presenting allegations almost as fact.
Often, yeah. Little critical examination in those early days. This constant stream of vivid, terrifying stories just hammered the idea home, making the threat feel incredibly real and immediate.
And books, too, right? I remember hearing about Michelle Remember.
Exactly. Books like that claimed to be true stories of surviving satanic abuse. They were bestsellers. So you had news reports, talk shows, books. It created this echo chamber where the narrative just kept getting reinforced.
And then popular culture gets pulled in, horror movies, heavy metal music. Suddenly, they're not just entertainment, they're seen as tools for satanic recruitment.
Right. It paints this picture where satanic influence isn't some fringe thing. It's potentially in your living room on your kid's stereo. It taps into that parental anxiety we talked about, culture reflecting fear, but also amplifying it.
So it becomes this perfect storm feeding on itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where the psychology comes in. The Satanic Panic it's practically a textbook case of mass hysteria.
Yeah.
Several cognitive biases were really running rampant.
Okay, like,
Well, first, there's the availability heuristic. Because the media was filled with these incredibly vivid, scary stories about ritual abuse, people wildly overestimated how likely or common it actually was. The stories were easy to recall, so the threat felt much bigger than reality.
so the scarier and more memorable the story, the more real it feels, even if it's rare or untrue.
Precisely. Vividness gets mistaken for frequency. And then you layer on confirmation bias. Once that seed of fear was planted, people subconsciously started looking for anything that concerned it.
Hmm.
A weird symbol someone saw. A child saying something ambiguous. Suddenly, it's not random, it's evidence fitting the pattern they already suspect. They ignore things that don't fit.
So you filter reality to match the fear.
You do. And combine that with social contagion, fear is contagious, right? It spreads through social networks, like gossip, but much more potent. Individual worries snowball into this collective panic.
And were there people actively pushing this narrative, people who benefited?
Definitely. Sociologists talk about moral entrepreneurs. These are individuals or sometimes groups, who have a vested interest in promoting a particular moral panic. They might gain influence, sell books or seminars, push a specific religious or political agenda. They leverage the public's anxiety.
Okay, so you have the media amplification, these psychological biases, making people susceptible, maybe some people actively pushing it, and then this fear starts seeping into actual institutions, law enforcement, the courts.
And that's where the consequences become truly devastating because, yes, law enforcement often got caught up in it. Many police departments back then, they didn't have specialized training in interviewing children, especially about trauma or abuse, in a non-leading way.
Some mistakes were made.
Big mistakes. Investigators, sometimes with good intentions but flawed methods, used leading questions. They might pressure witnesses, especially children, who are suggestible and want to please adults. This could, and unfortunately sometimes did, lead to false memories or even false confessions. Yeah, and the legal system itself really struggled. You had cases built almost entirely on the testimony of children who'd been interviewed maybe dozens of times by different people, therapists, police, social workers.
Each interview potentially shaping the story further.
Exactly. Contaminating the testimony, blurring memory and suggestion. And in that climate of intense fear, judges and juries were also susceptible. It led to wrongful convictions. Lives were just destroyed.
It's hard to even imagine being accused of something so horrific based on the panic itself.
The human cost was immense. Parents accused, children taken away sometimes permanently, people lost jobs, their standing in the community, their freedom, based purely on allegations that often had zero physical evidence.
And that kind of accusation, satanic ritual abuse, it carries such a stigma.
An incredible stigma. How do you even defend yourself against something like that when society is convinced it's real and happening everywhere? The psychological trauma for the accused, for their families, for the children caught in the middle, it lasts for decades. It's still being felt today. Communities were torn apart by suspicion. Trusts just evaporated.
You mentioned religious fundamentalism earlier. How significant was that specific element?
It was really significant. You can't fully understand the Satanic Panic without looking at the role certain religious groups, particularly some evangelical Christian communities, played.
Okay.
For many in these groups, the idea of active, conspiring satanic cults wasn't just a possibility, it was a theological certainty. They saw it as a literal battle between good and evil.
And popular culture fit into that worldview.
Perfectly. Things like Dungeons and Dragons, heavy metal, horror movies, they weren't just entertainment. They were seen as tools of the devil, deliberately used to corrupt young people and lure them into Satanism.
So they actively promoted this narrative.
Very actively. They organized conferences, published newsletters and pamphlets warning people. They even lobbied government officials for action against this perceived threat. This deep religious conviction made the panic incredibly resistant to rational argument or lack of evidence. It wasn't just a fear. For many, it was an article of faith.
So if it was that entrenched, how did it eventually start to fade?
It did fade, right?
It did, thankfully. By the mid-1990s, the panic started losing steam. A major factor was simply the consistent lack of evidence. Despite years of investigations, police departments, the FBI, nobody could find credible proof of these widespread, organized satanic cults committing the crimes alleged.
The big cases started falling apart.
Yes. High-profile trials, like McMartin itself, ended in acquittals after years of legal battles, or the convictions were later overturned on appeal as the flaws in the investigations came to light. The narrative started to crumble under scrutiny.
Did the media change its tune as well? It did, gradually. Coverage became more skeptical. Journalists started questioning the narrative instead of just amplifying it. And importantly, law enforcement and mental health professionals learned some very hard lessons. They developed much better evidence-based protocols for interviewing children and investigating abuse claims.
So a slow turn towards reason and evidence.
Exactly. But the whole episode left us with these critical, painful lessons about the dangers of moral panic, how easily fear can overwhelm facts, and why rigorous, evidence-based inquiry is just paramount.
And looking back now, it seems almost like a blueprint, doesn't it, for how collective anxiety can just run wild. Do you see parallels today?
Oh, absolutely. It's impossible not to. The structure of the Satanic Panic, the vague fears, the role of media or online platforms in amplifying them, the confirmation bias, the targeting of scapegoats. We see echoes of that in things like the QAnon phenomenon.
Yeah, I can see that.
Or even in recurring moral panics about, say, video games or social media corrupting youth. The specific fear changes, but the underlying mechanism, That pattern of social anxiety latching onto a narrative and spreading rapidly, often fueled by misinformation. That pattern is remarkably consistent.
So the core lesson is timeless, really.
I think so. Fear and suspicion, even if they feel righteous or protective, can lead to terrible injustice if they aren't balanced by critical thinking and a demand for actual evidence. It really highlights how vital media literacy is now.
Especially now with information and disinformation spreading so instantly online.
Right. You, me, everyone listening, we need the skills to evaluate claims, to look for credible sources, to spot manipulation, especially narratives designed to trigger fear. Because, as the Satanic Panic showed, once fear takes hold, reason has a really hard time catching up.
The truth becomes fragile.
Very fragile. And while the capital S Satanic Panic is mostly over, the effects linger. People wrongfully accused are still fighting to clear their names. Families are still dealing with the trauma.
So understanding this isn't just history, it's about building a more resilient, more rational society now.
Exactly. It forces us to ask some tough questions.
Like what?
Well, what's our responsibility, collectively and individually, to challenge assumptions? To push back against fear-based narratives? How do we cultivate that deeper cultural awareness, that critical thinking, to make sure we don't let fear run away with us again? How do we apply these lessons today, right now, in our own communities and information spaces?
Heavy questions, but important ones. Definitely something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.